You're not a bad man. You're just untrained. Most men think they're helping, when in reality, they're sabotaging their own relationships.
I was letting things fall on her and she was being a safety net, and at some point she just felt so lonely. She was the only one making these choices, that she was the only one thinking about all these things.
Zach Watson breaks down how mental load is silently destroying intimacy, trust, and equality.
I made my first video saying, I think I just added mental load for my wife. There's one night she came into bed with me and she's like, we can't do this anymore, it's not working. At least talking about routines and standard operating procedures.
This isn't just therapy talk. It's a survival guide for modern fatherhood, masculinity, and partnership.
The average is about 1 week paternity leave for men. I took 12 weeks, so I took 12 times the average.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Zach Watson. He's an invisible labor coach and a fair play facilitator. So fair play is a really interesting methodology where it helps couples divide up tasks and really create a sense of equanimity and fairness in the home to help kind of deal with some of the mental load. If you don't know what those words mean, Zach will be telling us all about it. So Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's just start with some definitions first of what is mental load?
So I'm going to start off with pointing out that what I'm going to share with you is a regurgitation of a lot of women pouring a lot of education into me. So I just want to call that out first, as I know that I am a mental load coach. I teach men invisible labor. About pretty much everything that I've learned academically about this is from women. And I make sure to call that out because I think there's a lot of moments where oh my God, this guy finally gets it. No, I learned it. I didn't just get it from the bat, but mental load, I think I'm actually going to speak in real quick. Am I speaking probably more to women or to men on your show?
Yeah, I say most of our listeners are men.
Okay. Often where I start the conversation is with a lot of guys, is where it shows up in their... So mental load are the things that we're thinking about in general, that we're responsible for, that we're carrying with us. I know for me as a content creator, as a coach, as a business owner, I'm thinking about what's the next video I'm making all the time. I'm thinking about, is the thought that I just had, is the moment that I just had that I could make a video about, should I be considering how to turn this into a video? I'm thinking about my clients. I'm thinking about the guys that have ghosted me, and how can I be supporting them? I think for a lot of guys, maybe in a sales role, they're thinking about, how do I get my next client? What is the next sequence that I run? What's the next play that I run? For project managers, they're thinking about the deadlines coming up. When am I going to have time to write this report and send that data over, send that email? Ooh, I didn't respond to that guy. Mental load, I delineate. I think a lot of people collapse mental load with emotional labor. Mental load or I'm going to say cognitive labor are very left brain. They're very logistical. They're thinking more so than feeling. And then emotional labor is the worrying aspect. So, I didn't send that report over. My colleague's going to look bad, and they might feel hurt from that. I forgot to send that thing over to the potential client. They might feel hurt. They might think less of me, and I should probably add some urgency and prioritize that. I need to, oh shoot, I'm going to be late for work. I should probably send my wife a text saying when I'm going to be late, because I know that she doesn't care that I'm late. She cares whether I communicate that I'm late or not. So those are the two sort of buckets. I think a lot of people put them together. I try to separate them out a little bit because I think it improves our vocabulary. It improves our literacy around being able to understand and have more informed conversations about it.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what got you into wanting to specialize in that?
I don't think I ever necessarily wanted to specialize in it. I think the people kind of came to me 4 years ago, almost 2021. I had been focused on making TikTok videos. I thought I was going to be a general personal development influencer. I would read an audiobook on the way to work, and then I would talk about it. Originally, I had done a lot of YouTube videos, and it put a huge crevice in our marriage because I was spending so much time on it. And I discovered when my students were blowing up on TikTok, I was like, this is stupid. You make some garbage videos. Like, I should be able to do that. So I started making TikToks because I realized I can make a video in 10 minutes. I didn't need to spend an hour editing. And so later in 2021, our child came, and I started just talking about fatherhood. In America, I was just looking at the stat from that because I was doing some research around the New York Times article. It just came out about the Trump presidency and what they're going to try to do to elevate babies being born in our country. So the average is about 1 week paternity leave for men. I took 12 weeks. So I took 12 times the average. In that time, I did not know that was abnormal. I thought that was just like kind of a normal thing, but it wasn't clear to me. So as I was talking about a lot online, that was when kind of my following came to me. It was a lot of moms really appreciating the way I was going about fatherhood. And so I quickly developed an audience on TikTok in 2021. Fast forward about a year later, I stopped putting my child in my videos, which really stagnated my growth. But I realized that it was inappropriate that I was putting my child in so many videos. And I started talking about fair play. My bunch of people had recommended that I read the book Fair Play. Laura Danger and Abby Eckel were two people that I was friends with that had significantly larger followings that both recommended I read it. I know you said that you talk about the fair play cards with some of your clients when you need to better articulate all the responsibilities that exist in the home. And so I started reading it and, doing what I do with the audiobooks, so just giving my like candid response to the chapters. And I remember chapter 2 and chapter 3 saying them out loud and being like, wow, I did not realize how much I was not valuing my wife's time the way that I thought I was. And so I started talking about fair play. We're aiming to do some implementation around it. And then at some point, she talks a lot about the word mental load and the second shift. And so I made my first video saying, I think I just added mental load for my wife. That video did really well, about 100,000, which was like, I was having one of those once a month. And then I was like, well, let's see if lightning can strike twice. So the next day I made another video talking about mental load. It's something really simple. Like, I think I just added mental load for my wife. Our toddler was going down for a nap. They were sick. Typically we give them milk, but I thought that it might be better to give them water. So I said, hey, Alyssa, should we give her milk or water? And I kind of caught myself afterwards being like, you know what? I could have chosen that for her and said, hey, I think we should do water because X, Y, and Z, rather than having her make the choice. Just like, when I was in a sales role, you don't ask the client, hey, what day do you want to meet next week? You say, hey, is Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern available to you? Because we know as salespeople that you're supposed to take out the friction out of like booking a call and getting that next business conversation going. So similarly, I was starting to realize I could do the same thing for Alyssa in terms of our parenting choices. So that video landed at about 6 million on TikTok. And again, what any good content creator does is they keep talking about the same thing that all of a sudden people found them for. So in about a couple weeks, I added a couple, I think 50 or 100,000 folks following me on TikTok and then Instagram. Started my mental load series. I got to part 10 and today I'm on part 313. So I think along the way, I was talking about fair play. I ended up taking the fair play facilitator training, rubbing shoulders with a lot of other coaches, therapists that were making a living off this. Meanwhile, I was a software salesperson, and I got a lot of comments saying, "Hey, can you put together some training for my husband? Like, I can send him these 90-second clips, but like they're not they're not the greatest for long-term education. So I just pulse checked and said, hey, would anyone be interested in like a Fair Play book club? And then I slowly started gathering clients, just like one-on-one calls here and there. And at some point, a couple more videos went viral later in the year. And I added a couple 100,000 followers. And a lot of people were really interested in taking me up on services for doing Fair Play. So I think it was something that I got really good at articulating quickly. And a lot of people appreciated that. And I recognized at one point that I wanted to help other men. And I think there were a lot of moments where at first I was making very egotistical videos that were like, yeah, look at me, I'm a good dad. Like, this is the thing that I do. And then at some point I was like, well, that's not making the internet any better. That's not making men any better. They're probably just going to feel defensive. So I started trying to share more vulnerabilities about like where I was dropping the ball, and why I felt like it was me dropping the ball. And I think at that point when I started making that shift, it was actually changing minds. It was helping men to articulate. It was helping men to talk about it. It was helping women articulate it with their husbands, and they were able to share a video and them not feel immediately defensive. But here's a guy sharing about where he screwed up, but also like where the education is in that. So the market kind of found me, and that's why I'm doing that full time. It's also really fun, like making videos for a living. So I don't know that I think any of us, we find that we're good at something and we figure like, if we can make the world a better place with that, I think I can make the world a better place with this better than I can selling software right now. So that's what brought me here.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you this, like, was mental load imbalance a source of conflict in your marriage? Like, was that something that came up that you were fighting about before you had words for it? Or did it kind of get the spotlight once you started talking about it more online?
Yeah, so I mean, I would argue that it was the main reason that we got separated in 2018. We've been married for about 9.5 years now. Year 3, we got a multifamily house we're living in right now. Neither of us had owned a house before. Both of our parents had only owned single families, and we're very, very interested in passive income. And we had read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I was all jazzed up about it, and once we acquired the place, a lot of the decision making, a lot of the thinking started landing on Alyssa. And a lot of it was I was being busy with my quote YouTube career with my 2,000 followers over there. And I think there were a lot of moments where I was letting things fall on her and she was being a safety net. And at some point she just felt so lonely that she was the only one making these choices, that she was the only one thinking about all these things. She was having to remind me to follow up with contractors, and the learning curve that I was going through of being a homeowner, like she was carrying the mental load of making sure I was doing my job of my part of it. So I think, especially if you become a property owner, if you become a parent, if you start taking on more responsibilities with your partner, and if both of you are going through learning curves, but one of you is maybe a little bit more academic or detail oriented, there's a good chance that learning curve is going to fall on that person first, and they might end up maybe not dragging them along, but like because they're going to get ahead, they occur like a safety net. And so then I started slacking a lot in terms of what was needed from me versus what Alyssa ended up carrying. So yeah, I don't think I had the words for it then. I knew that there was a lot of responsibility on her, but I thought it was more the YouTube thing than anything. I think part of it was YouTube was fun and easy and you got immediate positive feedback versus like renovating a home and not quite sure when renters are going to be able to live in it. There's no immediate feedback to that. And you're just it was a financial crap storm. I don't know if we can swear on here, but it was just like, it was 22 months without rent. And it was like a large mortgage for us. I was on a teacher salary and she was a vet technician. So we didn't have very high paying jobs. So it was really challenging for us, and we thankfully made it through it. But yeah, it was a huge issue for us. We just had no language for it up front.
Yeah. I want to highlight what you said because I see that a lot, with some of my clients that I work with, that like knowledge gap or experience gap, especially, like around home ownership, around financial literacy, around childcare. If there's somebody who is really far behind, and they get in a relationship with somebody, I think it can create that dynamic really quickly. Because the person that's more skilled doesn't want to fuck it up, right? Like they don't want, they often don't trust that new person with the task because the new person is just by default, like not as skilled at it, right? They're new. And the new person, sometimes is very intimidated to take on those tasks. So I think it can create a lot of resentment really, really quickly, Yeah. Like, I guess on that note, like, how do you recommend that people teach each other, and close that gap? Because I can see that being a pitfall of, I think, partners don't want to teach each other things sometimes. They like expect that the other person's perfect kind of right out the box.
So, I mean, I like how you actually kick things off, as you said, like, let's start with some vocabulary. I think vocabulary is a hugely beneficial tool for starting these conversations. When you start adding new vocabulary into any conversation, it forces somebody to like consider what the hell that means. So like, Mark, what's one of the maybe more recent challenges you've either had with a client or a customer or a family member? You don't have to name names, but like what's a challenge that you've gone through recently that you could imagine coming to, your wife or to a friend and just venting a little bit about?
Yeah, sure. So I think like a recent challenge that comes up with a lot of my clients, right, is like, how do I say this? It's like a lack of awareness for doing things around the house. So you have like the guy that's like fixing shit, right? And he's like, fixing the toilet, doing all this stuff around the garage and just making things better. But then he's in this bind where like he doesn't want to ask for attention because he feels like that would make him like a pussy or something. But then he gets really resentful when the wife doesn't notice that he's, fixed X, Y, and Z, right? Or that the door no longer creaks,
I'm going to adjust the way that I want you to answer the question. I want you to talk. My follow-up question or my follow-up comment is going to be as if I'm your partner or I'm your friend, and how I'm going to introduce vocabulary into the conversation between the two of us. So, like, what's a challenge that you are having or that you've had?
Oh, from my perspective.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just redo that one, right? It's like, like I'm fixing all the stuff around the house and like she doesn't notice anything and I feel like I'm being taken for granted and like, she doesn't really care about the stuff that I care about and she's just like entitled and, blind. Right.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you hang on to a ton of the mental load around managing house improvements, and it sounds like you also deal with a good amount of the emotional labor that it takes to care about these things and get them done in a timely fashion so that it's not a burden to the rest of your family and you don't feel seen in the domestic labor that you're doing as well as the invisible labor to get those things done. And, Mark, if you didn't know those words, you might be, what did you just say?
Yeah. Like what's invisible labor? Like, what do you mean? Yeah.
So I think like by using fresh vocabulary, it forces people to ask the question what that is. And I could say, well, you'd said fixing the toilet, right? So there's the literal physical aspect of it. That's the physical, or I might call it domestic labor. There's the thinking of it. There's the going to Lowe's and Home Depot and your local store to get the stuff, knowing what's got to be on the list. Remembering that when the kids come home, like you got to turn the water back on so that, they can wash their hands. Or, training them in advance that we're going over to the neighbors to shower tonight, or we're going over to grandma's house to shower tonight because the water's not going to be working while we're fixing this thing. And then there's the emotional labor of just like caring and worrying and concerning yourself with these things and considering the emotional burden that it is on your family as they're dealing with those things. So I think when we can introduce vocabulary, it is a great conversation starter. Sometimes I think people don't want to seem dense. So like, yeah, I do those things. And they're just like, I don't know what they just said. But I think if we go into campaign mode of like just continuing to use that word and those words, eventually my cousin, he texted me about 6 months ago saying, you'd be so proud of me, Zach. Like I used the word mental load today with my wife and then with like one of my colleagues. And I was like, what was the sentence that you said? And he's like, one of them One of them was a little bit of a miss, but his wife had asked him to like turn on the Roomba or something. He's like, that's not on my mental load. And I was like, well, maybe that's the issue, that it's not on your mental load. And then the other one, like he was talking with a colleague that was, having some challenge with a client. And he just dropped some vocabulary in there. It didn't lead to a conversation, but he got so much excitement out of sharing with me that like he was using Zach's vocabulary. So I think that we can slowly, even when we think about, have you ever heard the word matrescence? So taking out the MATR part, essence, where else do we hear that like end of word?
Like it's just essence, like the essence of something, or like the core.
If you were to think of it as like let's see, there's a prefix and a suffix. If you look at that as a suffix, where else do you see it as a suffix?
I don't know. Give me
adolescence.
That. Adolescence. Okay.
So adult essence, matra essence. So adolescence is like becoming an adult. So matrescence is becoming like a mom, and it's letting go of things. What I don't think exists is putrescence, which is like becoming a dad. But like when we can start introducing these kind of words, the other thing that I think is interesting is it creates this concept of, if this word exists, that means I'm not alone and the only one experiencing it. So when we start hearing words like, oh, like this feeling that I'm feeling, like the first time someone hears that depression is a thing, like, why am I so sad all the time? And they're like, oh, you probably have depression. What's depression? And they're like, yeah, I think I have that. Like the amount of like feeling heard and seen in your individual experience that you're not the only one is like a huge door opener for, I think, a lot of people.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. The feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Well, so let's like dig into the matrescence, right? Or the becoming a homeowner. You've named a couple of these like key transition points. So how can a couple navigate these major life changes? Because I do think a lot of people come in blindly, or they get like really vague, shitty advice of like, oh, it'll come natural. Like you'll just know what to do. You look at the baby in the eyes and you'll just know exactly what you need, or like love finds a way, which is like not helpful at all, right? And just like adds to anxiety. So how can couples specifically, right, navigate these major life changes in a more intentional, conscious way?
So the way that I'm a fan of doing it. So the first place I heard this was, I think, with Tim Ferriss back in like 2019, as he was talking about how he was dating this woman and all the time she would come to him with challenging emotional conversations, and he was kind of caught off guard, and he's like, I no, thank you. Like, I'm good right now. I don't want to talk about this right now. So he was kind of talking about like batching tough conversations. And I think similarly, when I was in sales, I remember we were told we're raising prices this month. And I sent out probably a couple dozen emails saying, hey, your price is going to be going up in the next 90 days. Just giving you an FYI, feel free to book a call. I got a call probably 15 minutes later from one of these people. And I was like, I'm going to let this one ring. They're probably really angry. They probably have a lot of things that they want to say. I don't know if this is going to be a useful conversation for either of us. They might feel at first like they're getting something out their chest, but it's not going to go well. So I just send an email back, hey, sorry I missed your call. Grab some time on my calendar. I know that when we show up to that meeting, I probably already know some of their concerns. I have an idea of some of the emotions that they might be going through. I can even say, hey, I'm in the email, I think I said like, hey, I'm assuming you're responding to that email that I sent earlier. Happy to talk with you about X, Y, and Z. That's a way better conversation that we're able to have because we have it scheduled. Now, I think in a relationship, you can't always do that. I mean, you're a therapist, you probably know better than I do. But I think similarly to that example is like, if we can, I don't know about batching tough conversations, but if we can create a purposeful, safe place to talk about them, similar to, I think, when people go to couples counseling and they can share a bit more where they have a third party to help them stay within some boundaries and feel kind of, I think they're more likely to do emotional labor when they have a third party hearing them talk shit to their partner. Well, some people don't. They probably talk more shit because they're like, oh, nice, someone will back me up on this.
Yeah, trying to get like the judge on their side. That does all.
Yeah. But I think, so I coach a lot of the guys that I work with to have a weekly conversation with your partner. I think just like, I think a lot of them start off with like, what do I need this for? And I think, well, do you have a weekly check-in meeting with your manager or with your team at work? And most of the time it's a yes. When I was in sales, we had daily stand-ups, and then we had a weekly meeting, like looking at deals that had gone through. When I was a teacher, it was like looking at routines that were breaking down and we wanted to fix. I was a teacher at a bunch of different schools, and one of them, all the kids had dealt with a lot of trauma. So we were doing a lot of emotional labor, helping them like cope with life. And so all the time we had really strict policies around things. A lot of them, had either been run risks or like suicide risks. And so we had really tight policies around like having metal objects, like leaving scissors out, leaving sharp objects. And so every week we're talking about, hey, like that thing that we did on Thursday, really, we got kind of dangerous there. Here's what needs to be adjusted. I think similarly, if we can have those conversations in a professional setting, I don't see why we can't have them in a family setting. Every day it feels like there's something being adjusted about our nighttime routine. I know since we moved back into our 2-bedroom apartment from a four bedroom house, we've been sharing the bedroom with our toddler. So every night it looks just a tiny bit different, but it has a lot of the same key components to it. Some days when I'm going in there and maybe Alyssa's managed the bedtime routine, things have changed over the 3 days where maybe now we're reading magazines. Now we're reading 2 magazines. Maybe she's sitting in her lap now instead of in her bed. And like identifying what are the allowable habits that were agreed upon around boundaries of, there's one night she came into bed with me and she's like, we can't do this anymore. It's not working. So I think having those, at least talking about routines and standard operating procedures, it might sound kind of businessy and a little like you're wearing a collar, while you're talking about that. But I think if that's how good organizations run, I don't see why families can't run that way. So I think at least to start, I know a lot of the people that come my way, they're in a tough place in their marriage. And so the first place I recommend starting is just have a weekly meeting. I don't care what you do when you get there for the most part. I just want you to sit down. I want you to have an agenda set up, whether it's physical or digital. I want you to know where you're going. Like, you going to the living room couch? Are you going to a local coffee shop? Are you having a date night? I want to know what are the snacks provided, because if you're not going to have an emotionally good time, I want you to at least have a chemically good time. And if that's an adult beverage, then so be it. I want you to look forward to doing it. So starting off, just having a space to talk about stuff, have like a status check-in. I know a lot of people introduce like gratitude. They talk about emotions. I usually start with very logistical. I think logistics are easy to talk about. And it's a good like starting place. Like, we have that wedding coming up in a couple months. Do we book the Airbnb? Ooh, let's do that now. Let's pay off that credit card we've been wanting to do. The kids this week, they've been really rambunctious from all of the Easter candy. Can we say goodbye to it, or we'd need to give them 2 more days for it? That's kind of my phase 1, is like, you're just getting in the habit and you're getting used to the habit. I'm sure you've probably coached people to do something similar before.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Maybe, right?
Yeah, I do the weekly review check-in. I do my own relationship, and yeah, that's like a really great tool for couples to have. Just to pull back the camera, right, and do like that kind of metacognition about how their relationship is going. Yeah.
Now I'm curious as to, so over time there's about 5 phases I've kind of identified through the evolution that Alyssa and I have gone through. I'm curious, what phase are you on, and or like, are there, sub phases that you've seen with people? So phase one is probably you're not in the greatest space. You haven't ever done these, or you always get off track. So stage one is get the habit set up. Stage two, I walk them through the Connection Codes core emotion wheel. And the goal in there is to practice a little bit more of our emotional literacy, talking about like, I feel angry, I feel sad, I feel hurt, I feel lonely, I feel guilt, shame, fear. So I have them start trying to do that and just start talking about those emotions together, because I know a lot of guys, especially myself, I was kind of grew up knowing it was okay to be happy and sad, maybe angry. That's about it. Not allowed to be fearful, not allowed to feel hurt, not allowed to feel lonely as a man. So that's kind of phase two, is working on that emotional literacy, still keeping it kind of logistical. Once you guys get the habits in place, you're able to talk about emotions. I start implementing that and including the fair play card deck. Anyone watching on video, I'm showing the fair play cards, which Mark alluded to earlier. So the fair play method and or the fair play book comes with cards. There's 100 of them, of about 100 different responsibilities that often exist in homes. So that's where I have them do what I call the 51% activity, where what they do is they go through the deck, they identify who generally owns 51% of any of these cards. Typically, the guys I've seen are typically the underloaded. Mark, I know you said you're in the opposite of the gender norm. But I would say most of the guys are seeing, they probably have anywhere between 10 to 30 of the cards at 51%. I've yet to see a guy, at least that's come to me, have more than 50% of the deck. So also from there, I think in her book, she talks about doing like a multi-hour deep dive and like creating the minimum standard of care of things. I encourage people to do it slow and steady. Starting off with, like, if your wife is ever saying like, I feel like you'd never hold the mental load of things, I would encourage choosing one that you own the majority of. I think for statistics have actually shown that the bins, or like the trash, is like the number one thing that guys typically own. If she is still reminding you, it's time to put that to an end, and start having alarms, figuring out what it is, so that is no longer on her mental plate. That's no longer in a part of her cognitive labor, and that you own that full task. And a huge part of the fair play method is taking responsibilities around the home and kind of siloing ownership to one person. So this is the phase 3, where we start implementing those standard operating procedures. Phase 4, Alyssa identified kind of with me a couple months ago. She's like, Zach, we have this weekly meeting, but like, I'm thinking about this stuff all week, and you just have to think about it once a week for this meeting. This is bullshit. So we started doing daily check-ins, daily like logistical check-ins, looking at the calendar, double checking we're on the same page of who's picking up our kid from preschool, and then we'll have still weekly conversations to talk about the bigger things that don't fit into daily. And I think stage 5, still not sure if this is really a stage or not. Seems to be that we're in a pretty hectic 2 months as she was working on her sister's bridal shower, and so there's like another full-time or part-time job, and so we're really struggling to have that weekly meeting. And so what I was doing is I was setting the agenda and trying to get that stuff talked about throughout the week. So kind of sprinkling them into all of those daily conversations, and or whenever I was finding opportunities, kind of bring up some of the other ones. And I think by stage 4 and 5, like, you've established enough safe space that it's not hard to talk about those things at most given times. I think those weekly meetings are really important when you feel like you're walking on eggshells around the people in your life, and like, I don't know when's a good time to talk about this with you, so we need a place for that. And I think once you've kind of broken down that barrier and it's just kind of safe to talk about it at any time, that's when maybe, I don't think it's great to evolve out of a weekly meeting. They'll still think it's really valuable, but when you're in like those hectic parts of life where it's really hard to keep that time down. Maybe it's summertime, the kids are out of school and you don't have a minute really to yourself. And or when you do have a minute to the two of you, you don't want to talk about logistics and standard operating procedures. Maybe that stage 5 might be valuable.
Yeah, I'd say like I'm like 4, or I don't know, 3 maybe, sometimes sprinkle in 4, right? Like we have the meeting, right? We do that. We talk about stuff. I think we have the standard operating procedure fairly dialed in on things. I don't have kids yet, but I can imagine when I have kids and that gets added, like the daily stand-ups are going to be way more important because there's like, someone that we're managing that doesn't have, as much cognitive function that we do. I'd say like, we have the meetings fairly regularly enough, and then we'll, text each other stuff every once in a while during the day if things come to mind. I'm curious for you, like, you talk about that emotional safety a lot, right? And as therapists, that's a big thing. We chat about all the time. Like, how do you build that? Because I found, in my marriage and also with a lot of the guys I work with, like one or the other partner is often really defensive when you start this, when you're on stage 1, there is that eggshell thing. I think, people can feel like they're being criticized, or they can feel like, they feel ashamed because like they don't know how to cook a meal or whatever, right? Like they feel it can highlight kind of deficiencies in their adulting, that they that they've ignored when they were single. But now they have to kind of deal with that they're in, a couple and they're building a family. So how do you like create that safe space, or how do you start to like overcome some of those emotional barriers? Because like I said, I've seen with some of my guys, these initial conversations can start off as fights, right? They can become like really devastating in the beginning before there's that, safety and common ground established.
So I'll start with the bias that I have in this question is that I think a lot of the people that I'm actively building the safe space with came to me saying, we have problems, we need help. So it's a little bit clearer to start with them because they came to me for help, and it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do on this 1-on-2 call, and I'm going to build it with you. It's obviously a little bit different for maybe someone that's feeling fear of sharing with their partner, that they do feel concerns, but like they won't they won't go to the coach. They won't, get a therapist. So the exercise that I have them go through, and I'm going to share, and then I'm going to talk about breaking the 4th wall. So the exercise I talked about there in that phase 2 was the core emotion wheel from Connection Codes. I'm a big fan of it. I feel like it's missing gratitude, and I feel like it could be missing 1 or 2 other things, but one, it's really great for, they talk about, they compared it to brushing your teeth for your amygdala, and like kind of regulating your nervous system. So I'll go through like a half of one right now. So all you're doing is kind of identifying what's happening for you emotionally, using like primary colors of emotion. So anger, I felt anger when Trump has been talking recently about the baby bonuses and that $5,000 is enough to cover new parents. I felt shame. I felt shame the other day when I said, when Alyssa asked me if I did something and I said that I did it, but I kind of half-assed it. Guilt. I felt guilt this morning when I forgot our toddler's water bottle in her backpack. Fear. I feel fear that we're going to end up in a really scary recession in the near future. So what I just did was I took those emotions, identified a moment in the last maybe 24 hours that I've felt that emotion. And the part of the exercise is both partners get to go. So if you end up saying, one of them is hurt, I felt hurt when you said this to me the other day. You're not saying you hurt me when, you're saying I felt hurt when. So you're taking accountability for this is your emotional experience and that it came from something that they were the stimulus for, but not necessarily saying that they purposefully did it or that they did it with any kind of intention. I think that when we can start talking about our shame and our guilt, it's a huge opportunity to build safe space. I know that this morning we were running late for getting ready for preschool, and Alyssa texted me while I was on the toilet. I told her, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. Does anyone want to go first? Just in case it is a not fun experience for whoever comes after me. And she texted me while I was on there, hey, I'm feeling fear that she still hasn't had breakfast and you haven't made lunch yet. And that right there, like, because we've been practicing that emotion wheel and we talk about our emotions a lot together, it was so much easier for me to come back and say, hey, gotcha. I totally get that. Versus, I know historically that conversation might have been her just starting to get kind of short, maybe snippy with me, where she's feeling fear. She's feeling maybe anger that I haven't started things, but she's not communicating the fear. She's just like acting it out, sort of. So I think if we can start prefacing, I think an easy one to start with, if someone's not talking about their emotions too often, is sharing, I feel fear when, like even this morning, like I've been trying, similar to what I was talking about, like using vocabulary with your people. This morning I said as I was dropping off our toddler preschool, I said, ooh, I felt shame when I forgot the water bottle this morning. Like, who says that? And I think when they get used to me sharing my emotions, it's just, it's the preschool providers, but when we can get really good at prefacing what we're communicating with an emotion, I've found that it improves my connections with the people that I'm talking to. And it improves the safety that I feel generally in my hour to hour of life. So I think that could be a great place, is talking about fears, because I think it's super human. Not superhuman, it's very human for us to experience that and to share it. And I think it's just a little bit easier. It's a little harder to say it hurt when you did this. I felt lonely when you did that. But if we can start with like, I felt fear when this happened, I felt shame, I felt guilt. I think shame is a tough one for a lot of people. So I'd probably start with fear and guilt. And then if you weren't ready for the whole wheel, kind of creep your way towards some of the other ones.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
Yeah, I think that's really key because it builds empathy, right? Like you're saying, when you bring up those emotions, you're like, oh yeah, like I've also felt shame and guilt. Like I get that, like this guy's not a bad guy. He's just like, messed up, forgot the water or whatever, right? Like it's easy to like brush it off. I'm trying to figure out, like, conceptualize this into a question, but like I like the way you're talking about having that shared common ground based on empathy and emotions, because what I see in a lot of my couples, especially when they come to me, and they're in that kind of pain, toxic place, right? They can see their partner as the enemy, right? It's like, you are doing this to me, you are hurting me, you are ignoring our kid because you hate me, right? Like you didn't pick up the trash because you know that I hate the trash and like I smell it and you just want to cause me pain. And it becomes this like real, like, adversarial, like nemesis relationship, which is a nightmare, right? It's a nightmare to feel like you're like living with your nemesis, right? Or you're married to your enemy. So I'm curious, I guess, one, like, do you see that kind of good versus evil dynamic in the work that you do? And if so, like, how do you start to deprogram that? Because I feel like it's a very, primitive and kind of like immature way of looking at a relationship, but so many people live in that, right? So many people live in that, me versus you versus, us together on a team.
I think the way that I like going about it, so I'm gonna actually come back a little bit and then to part of my previous answer that I realized I never came back to, and then I'm gonna go into that one. So your previous question of like, how do you build a safe space? I think the other thing that I've seen valuable for me and gives me like a little bit of bonus courage on trying something new is breaking the fourth wall with people. So when I was in sales, I learned that you can pretty much say you're a new guy anytime you want, and people give you a little bit more benefit of the doubt. So saying, oh, sorry, hey, could you just do me a favor? My goal was booking meetings with people. I was the cold caller trying to get booked calls for my closer. And I would call people and say, hey, glad that we agree. Hey, glad Tuesday at 9:00 is good for you. Hey, can you do me a favor? I'm kind of new here. Last time I did this, it didn't make it through. Can you just, when the invite comes through, can you accept the invite to make sure that it's on your calendar? Which, like, it just buys you a little bit more goodwill to ask something uncomfortable. So similarly, I think when we can say, hey, I listened to this podcast the other day and I heard this exercise that I thought might be really interesting for us. Could you try it out with me? I feel like it could make us stronger together. And if we like it, maybe it's something we continue to do. So it's kind of breaking the fourth wall on, like, you're talking about the conversation and not just having the conversation. And coming back to your question about, like, how do we deal with, like, this, like, adversarialness? I feel like it's a branch off of the, like, how do you build safe space? Oh wait, I was thinking about it and then I lost it. Do you remember what the last thing was that you asked?
Yeah, the question was, if you see that dynamic play out, right, in the work that you do, how do you start to have people feel like they're on a team moving towards a similar goal?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that, so I did the Landmark Forum. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but there was this concept that they had there, which was that you can't really be upset at something without being committed to something underneath. So, for example, I was talking to some clients the other day, and they were talking about the difference that they had in gift giving. So for him, he's like, I don't care about the Christmas cards. I don't care if the gift is in a Christmas bag in June for a graduation party. It's important to me that the gift gets there, versus she felt a lot of shame around, like, put it in a Christmas bag for a graduation gift? Are you nuts? Like, I would feel so much shame about that. And so I think when we look at someone's upset about something, it's usually because they're committed to something and that commitment is being broken in some way. So for the example of, like, the gift being packaged well and in a pretty way, they probably have some pride, some joy around seeing someone have a positive, present opening experience, but also they're committed to, they probably feel some judgment from maybe their peers, their colleagues, the other women in their family, if they were to be judged, like, oh, you didn't even get, like, new paper, like that is a negative experience for them. But I think when we can acknowledge some of the commitment underneath it, one, I think that person can feel so heard and like, oh my God, they understand me. Like, I could imagine if the couple I was talking with yesterday, if he had said, hey, honey, I understand that you feel ashamed because you are committed to having this person have a positive opening experience, not just, wearing the gift and having the gift after it's been opened. Now, that might be tough to do in a lot of moments where you'd said, like, oh God, you're doing this all to me. But I think especially when someone is sharing an upset, sharing a challenge that they're experiencing, where there's like an exterior care, like outside of them, that you can go ahead and try to acknowledge, I think that can be a great place to build empathy. And I think one of the things that Dr. Glenn talks about with connection codes is that the reason they chose those 8 is that on a brain scan, they tend to look very similar. So if you and me talk about overwhelm, it's probably going to look a little bit different. My overwhelm might not be the same as yours, but anger is going to look the same. Hurt, lonely, sad, guilt, shame, fear, joy, they're going to look the same on a brain scan. So similarly, if the two of us are talking about teal might have a different color, but if we're both talking about black, if we're both talking about white, or like fire engine red, those are like kind of primary colors, right? we know we're thinking and talking about the same color for the most part. So when we're talking about those emotions and we're able to talk about those specific ones, we're talking about a very similar emotion that the other person experienced. And it's way easier to empathize with somebody when you can feel that same version of it, versus when Alyssa says she's overwhelmed about something, like, dude, break that into some core emotions for me so I can better understand what you're experiencing. So getting good at using some of that language, I think, can really improve our empathetic experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think it builds EQ. And I think especially for like our female partners, like they want that from us. You know, like they want us to use those emotional words. I think as a guy, at least initially, it can feel kind of weird or frivolous or like inefficient. You know, it's like, why do I talk about this? Like, just do the thing, you know? But I do think women need that, right? That's how they feel connected to us as partners and as humans. I interviewed a guest, Michael Frey. I don't know if you read his book. It's called "This Is How Your Marriage Ends." Are you familiar with that book? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna have him on my podcast last week, I think.
Oh, he's great. Yeah, highly recommend it, right? But like, yeah, it's that idea, right, of men like dismissing feminine experience, right, and feminine values is what causes so many of these divorces. So being like, yeah, like, I don't know, just do it. Just do the dishes, you know, just like, just do laundry, you know, not being aware of all that invisible labor that goes into it or all that tabulation. I think it can be like a straight ticket to divorce for so many couples.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think whenever I hear people like saying, I think there's a lot of people that'll say like, yeah, like a marriage could end because they don't do the dishes. And then everyone's saying like, we kind of know that it's not about the dishes, it's about something a little bit different, but it also is kind of about the dishes. And it's so much about the messaging and the emotions that pop up around that, which is that the time is not feeling respected. It might not be worth your time, but apparently it's worth my time, you know, from the woman's point of view, oftentimes. And or like if that invisible labor of caring and thinking about the dishes throughout the day isn't respected, then what are all the other things? Like it's a dipstick for like how a lot of other invisible labor is being valued around the home.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said in the beginning of the episode, like how people's time ultimately is being valued. You know, I'm curious, like, how do you work with gender roles when it comes to this? Because, you know, because me as a millennial, right, I was raised that everything should be 50-50, right? That was like the idea. And like, it just didn't work for me personally, right? It just like didn't work to like half of us do the dishes sometimes and half of us do the dishes the other time, or like I clean half and she cleans half, right? And now we have some pretty clear distinctions that are not fully based on gender roles, but like I do, you know, majority of the cooking, she does a majority of the cleaning, for instance, right? So like, how do you work to deconstruct some of those gender roles or to, in some ways, like bring roles back into the conversation? Because like I said, I'm curious if that was what you were educated on, of like 50-50 everything, which I think is a good idea, but in practice just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think equality is not it's a great like North Star, knowing that you're never going to reach the North Star. I think equity is a really better model to go for. And I'm sure everyone's seen that picture before of like a bunch of people looking over a fence and how like some people don't need a tall stool and some people need a huge stool to be able to see over the fence. So I think when we look at equity, like Alyssa really doesn't, you know, she's just cold all the time. I think we're still looking at the reasons for that, but like outside tasks that are frequent, like her doing the trash, like I have no problem doing that versus that sucks for her. Dishes, she doesn't mind. She really doesn't like emptying the dishwasher, but I don't really mind doing the dishes nearly as much. She does really dislike when the counters are not cleared. So, you know, in our weekly meeting, we talked about this about, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, was for about 2.5 years, dishes had been my entire ownership. I was just accountable for them all the time. I was also sort of slipping on what the expectations were, which is that by the end of the night, the counter is clear, the dishes are away, and or they're being washed in the dishwasher. And at one point I had said, like, I know I'm slipping on this. I'm feeling a lot of guilt about it. And it's like when I'm doing the nighttime routine with our toddler and like I'm getting out of there at like 8:45, 9 p.m. I'm spent. Like I don't want to, go do 20 minutes of getting the dishes. Can I do that in the morning? And she's like, yeah, that works for me. And after a little while, she's like, I think this is actually not working for me. I would rather, we came back and had an iterative conversation on it. And she said, you know what? How about whoever's in there doing nighttime routine with her, the other person is doing the dishes. You're still accountable for it for like in the morning emptying it, but like, let's have that. So let's have some equity around whoever's doing that is doing the other thing. So I'm realizing that sense to make sense, but you get it. So I think if we consistently look at it as an iterative process, that it's never going to be quote right, but there's always going to be shifts and changes in how our small organization is being run, and it's our responsibility to shift to those. Like right now, I'm working on my book proposal, and the other night I was up till midnight trying to get some information over to one of my editors to help me work on it because I didn't want to be the bottleneck of that process. So when we eventually get into like crunch time around me authoring, like we're probably going to make some adjustments to the expectations around morning and or night routine. Like if I'm probably not going to be pulling all-nighters, but there's a good chance I'm going to be doing less work during the day and probably taking naps so that I can try to get things out the door. If I'm doing a poor job managing my time throughout the day. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think coming back to it is like equality is not really the goal. It's a North Star, but not the goal. Equity, I would say, is the goal. Identifying what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and or like what's your hard icks, like what's the thing that you really don't want to do, and what are the things that like you just don't mind doing. And I think that if you signed up to love and cherish your partner forever, so I think catering to their wants, if there's things you both really hate, then switch off on it. Especially if it's like something that has to get done. Did that answer the question? I'm not sure.
It did, yeah. And I guess what I'm hearing is like using emotions as that guide. Is that if something's giving you the ick, or like, your wife was like, hey, it's okay to do it in the morning, and then she felt differently and was like, it's actually not okay. Being open to that, being open to taking those risks, and just like experimenting and then seeing, okay, is this working for everybody? Because I agree. I think 50-50 doesn't work. I think it's a myth. And I think like trying to split everything equally is very rigid. So like you're saying, there's going to be these ebbs and flows throughout life where someone might need to take on more of these chores, just as the other person has another priority that they're working on. The thing is just monitoring for resentment, right? Being like, are they paying that secret resentment tax? Or is this actually coming from a place of like love and compassion?
Yeah. And when I think about like having iterative conversations, I think the other trap that we fell into when we were separated was that Alyssa would share something with me off the cuff, like, hey, can we start doing dishes this way? Can we start doing something this way? Because it wouldn't be put in any sort of formal context or like a formal conversation of like, hey, can we talk about how we do this thing around the home? I would remember it for a couple of days and then maybe I'd forget, or like I'd get off of it or something. And then a month later, she'd come back with a resentment and probably be like, I'm sick of this. Like, I thought we agreed that this was how the thing got done. Like, what happened? One of the things that I really aim for with those weekly conversations, when you bring up one standard operating procedure, let's say dishes in this case, is that you plan to have at least one more iterative conversation next week saying, hey, did that work? Can we keep reworking it until it works for both of us? And I think that I know Alyssa historically has felt like if she brings something up and then it's forgotten or something, she hasn't necessarily felt like she has the safety to bring it back up. And so she'll get extra kind of emotional. She'll kind of pour it on thick and like maybe raise her voice, and maybe I don't think she's acting, but I think like tears might come out. Like there's more that's she's going to share more with me, because she's going to say like, I don't know how else to get it through your head. Because I am forgetting things, but I think that's really hard for me because then I'm in like a shame spiral, and it's really hard for me to receive anything from there because I just feel like a crappy person. But if we can bring it up in those iterative conversations, then it's safe for both of us to feel guilt. It's safe for both of us to feel some loneliness, some sadness, some hurt. And it's safe for both of us to like take that constructive feedback and be constructive with it rather than shame spiral.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you've shared a lot of good stuff over this episode, but we are nearing the end. So Zach, if you want to follow you, learn more about you, follow your work, where can they find you online?
I would say if they like short form stuff, Instagram is the main place that you can find me, Zach Mental Load Coach. If they're looking for a little bit deeper dives on things, a little bit more educational, you can find me on YouTube. Put out at least one video a week, kind of sharing more educational stuff on there. And if people are looking for community, I have a free mental load basics community on School that I'm sharing a lot of those educational videos, but I'm aiming to create that safe place for men to ask those questions. So my mental load mastery community, those are the guys I work with. I have multiple calls a week where I'm showing up and we're working through things. So if you're looking for paid support, that's mental load mastery. But I would say join the School community. I think it's, if you wanted to ask a question like, hey, my wife is saying, that I'm not owning the mental load around this, but I don't get it. Like, Instagram, not necessarily a safe place to ask that question, but School community, absolutely a safe place to ask that question. I'm happy to answer it.
Great. Yeah. All that stuff will be in the show notes. So click on the show description. You'll see links to all that stuff, including the Fair Play cards and the book if you want to purchase those and get started. Zach, thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, do all the social, like, share, subscribe, send it to somebody who needs to hear this conversation, who may be struggling with mental load or just wants a great primer on what it is. If you find yourself having these fights over and over again, but don't have language for it, I think Zach is a great person for you to do some research on, follow, and just learn how to have the conversations from, that compassionate foundation that we've been talking about. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week on another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.